Hi, I'm Chris Norman, also known as Nose, co-author of the GURPS Game Aid for Founder. Okay, I gotta think of a quicker intro. This is the next video in my Learning GURPS series, Introduction to Magic. First, think about combat. There's really only one way to swing a sword or shoot a weapon. But if you've watched the video on combat, you can see that there's still a lot of different options that you can choose from to do just that. Now think about magic. If magic were real, how would it work? I can think of a few different ways based on games I've played or movies I've watched. The D&D Pathfinder system would just be one way. Well, GURPS has 4 different frameworks for magic, each with their varying levels of customizability, and trust me, that's enough for now. With those frameworks, you could design a multitude of different magic systems, once you're interested in doing so, but I get ahead of myself. This isn't a treatise on all different types of magic in GURPS, and I'm not an expert on any of them. But I have used 2, and these are the 2 I'm going to discuss. If you get into GURPS and enjoy it, there's a mountain of things that you can discover, including creating your own magic system. But that's not something I would recommend to a first-time GM. The 4 frameworks are loosely categorized as Magic as Skills, Magic as Powers, Ritual Path Magic, and Path Magic. I learned this from Enraged Eggplant's wonderful podcast, Only the Parts You Need, link below. He gives a great overview of each framework. But to start off with, I would recommend using the Magic as Skills system. This is the basic set or Dungeon Fantasy RPG magic system, which is expanded upon in the GURPS Magic Supplement. This is the closest to a D&D or Pathfinder-like magic system, although there are some differences. As the name suggests, the spells are actually skills in GURPS. They are very hard or hard skills based on IQ. A player can pick which spells they want to learn, so there's no standard magician's kit or cleric's prayer book. Each player can customize the spells to fit their character. Also, the character can attempt to cast any spell they know for 1 fatigue or energy point. They're not limited to so many slots per day. Notice I said attempt. Because the spell is a skill, the player will need to make a success roll versus the spell's skill level. And yes, this does mean that a spell could fail, which is unlike D&D or Pathfinder magic. But that means a spellcaster in GURPS could cast the same spell many times if they have enough fatigue or energy points. Since spells are skills, each spell can be initially purchased for 1 character point. 1 character point will get you started with the spell, although depending on your character's IQ, it may not be that reliable. Also, not all spells are able to be purchased right away. Some spells have prerequisites, and you must know the prerequisite spell before you're allowed to purchase the next spell. This keeps beginning characters from being able to purchase Fireball or Meteor Storm or some other powerful spell. Spells may also have a minimum magery level. A character that wants to cast spells must buy the magery advantage. This is the advantage that indicates that your character is magically adept. One weird thing about magery is that it has a level 0, which costs 5 character points. This is basically the magic awareness level. You can then purchase additional levels for 10 points per level. At this point, the magery advantage acts like a talent, where each level of magery adds to your IQ when checking to see if you can succeed the spell roll. So the advantage Magery 3 would cost 35 character points and would allow a mage with an IQ of 13 to cast a spell as if they had an IQ of 16. Of course, even this is customizable. I'm just relating what the basic set includes. But if you've learned anything about GURPS, there's always a way to customize it. A common customization is having the magery talent be aspected, meaning that if the magery is only good for, say, fire magic spells, then it only costs 6 points per level instead of 10. Not that I'm recommending that. For your first time, stick with the basic cost, because it's easiest. You don't have to worry about if the spell is in the correct college to cast. Your players can read the spells from the basic set, or the Dungeon Fantasy RPG Magic, or the GURPS Magic Supplement, and understand what they do. I've used Magic as Skills for many years, and was very happy with it. But, as I became more proficient in GURPS, and got more comfortable with customizing the game system to fit my world and how I like to play, I started dreaming about making my own magic system and spells. Unfortunately, there are no real guidelines for creating new spells with the Magic as Skills system. So you kind of have to wing it, and then you have to worry if it's balanced, and I didn't want to go down that route, so I started looking elsewhere. And I found the second type of magic system, magic as powers. Spells are made up of powers, which are really just advantages with enhancements and limitations and some flavor text. The advantage here, pun intended, is that a pun? I never really got puns. But the advantage is you can build any spell just like any other superpower in the game. So if you've gotten used to making enhanced characters like the Witcher character that I made in the GCS video, then creating spells is done the exact same way. And I'm in the process of making a video walking you through building a power, showing the math and how I'm using a Tiddlywiki as a spell editor. It's pretty cool, even if I do say so myself, but it isn't for the faint of heart. But more of that in the powers video. There are at least two frameworks that use magic as powers: Thaumatology Sorcery and Powers Divine Favor. And if you take a look into those, they're really made up of other underlying advantages. Modular ability and patron with the alternate abilities limitation. But the underlying spell or prayer is just a bog standard run-of-the-mill advantage. So with this magic system, everything is self-contained. You could create your own grimoire with just the basic set and maybe the power supplement. And this is what I'm doing. I'm working on my own magic system based on modular ability where the spellcaster has so many slots for the day, but unlike D&D, they can use the spells in those slots as many times as they want, assuming they have the fatigue to pay for it. I'm trying to build a D&D-like spell system for use in the Night Below adventure that I'm adapting. Of course, this points out the biggest disadvantage with the Magic as Powers framework. There are no master list of spells. Even something as simple as a fireball could be created hundreds of different ways depending on your world. Personally, I'm really enjoying it. In the world I'm creating, magical universities are in competition with each other, and the magic is a closely held secret. So one university might offer a fireball spell that does 3d6 damage. But another university might offer a spell that does 2d6 damage over an area effect. And a third might offer a 4d6 fireball that costs extra fatigue and weakens the character for a minute afterwards. But that's where I'm at in my gaming experience right now. I want to try to create a non-standard magical system, similar to D&D but different, with my own set of spells. And I can do this with the Magic as Powers frameworks. Another case in point, my current character Grend, the half-ogre druid. He really isn't a good druid. Well, I should say he's really not a good cleric. I hadn't expected him to be the sole healer for the party. In fact, he really can't heal people. He can only sacrifice his health to give to them, and then he must deal with his hit point loss some other way. He usually carries around a bandolier of healing potions to heal himself, but he can also say a prayer and go to sleep hugging a tree, an extension of Mother Earth, and will slowly regenerate overnight. Sure, it would have been much more effective to create a straight healing spell, but also more costly. And I didn't want Gren to become too powerful of a cleric. I had to run these spells by the GM for his approval, since he was using the Powers Divine Favor version, and I didn't want to overwhelm him with something too OP. The spells are effective, sort of, but not very powerful, and it gives the party something else to manage while adventuring. Plus, I like the quirkiness of his healing prayers. As flavor, Grend always does something obnoxious when applying a prayer to another character, either blowing snot on his hand and rubbing it on the recipient to enhance the connection to their soul so he can transfer hit points, to rubbing their wounds in dirt and moss, which is his version of first aid. Another example of a quirky spell is a mage that casts fire spells by utilizing the fire from someplace nearby. So to cast a fireball, there must be a source of fire within some reasonable distance, which of course is up to the GM to decide. The theme is that the magician is coaxing the fire from the elemental plane of fire and then manipulating it. The nearby fire has already weakened the separation between the planes, and the magician is taking advantage of that. The implementation is that I'm applying an accessibility limitation that I've defined as must be within a reasonable distance of a flame, and gave it a minus 20% cost, which I then applied to an innate attack burn advantage to create a fireball attack. Or Gren's Cure Poison prayer called May the Mother Protect You, In the dungeon fantasy RPG, all combat potions work quickly, so the prayer grants immunity to poison for 3 minutes. However, the recipient must make a success roll versus their health, or become nauseated, which is -2 to most rolls and -1 to active defense, and it can only be cast on their character once per day because their body couldn't take it a second time. Could I have built the spell without the backlash and the uses limitation? Sure, but it would have cost more and wouldn't have been as much fun in my humble opinion. Now, I must reiterate this point. You are responsible for creating all your spells in this framework. Sorcery and Divine Favor, and the Protection and Warning Spells Supplement, and the Sound Spells Supplement are the only officially printed Magic as Powers spells by Steve Jackson Games, as far as I know. And they're mainly just guidelines to show you how they might be done. It's up to you to create the rest. Fortunately, Enraged Eggplant, on his blog, has converted most D&D spells into a Magic as Powers format. The link is in the description. I highly recommend that you check it out. He has spent hundreds of hours creating spells, and I used many of his spells as blueprint to create my own versions. Now, I gotta take a step back, well, not literally, and again warn you that to create a spell from an advantage using the character creation rules, well, there's math involved to calculate the cost in character points. GCS helps, but honestly, I either type them up in a Google document or the Tiddlywinky. Again, I hope to show you that process later. As I mentioned in the NPC video, character points are really just a way to calculate the level of fun that a player can have with their character, to try to make it such that each character is evenly fun for the same amount of points. But it's okay if your character point calculation is a little off. If you think a particular limitation is worth more points than suggested, or you allow someone to round an 11-point cost down to 10, then so be it. So long as it doesn't happen too often, the characters should still be equally fun. Honestly, the most difficult part about building your spells from powers is knowing which advantage to use. Here, Enraged Eggplant's list of spells can be very helpful. I wanted to make an old-school Tangle Growth spell for my druid Grend, but I had no idea what advantage to start with. Enraged Eggplant's blog showed me the way. His version used the Bind advantage, and I would have never known. I've never used the Bind advantage. I could honestly say that I would not be trying to build my own spells if it weren't for Enraged Eggplant's spell list. I cannot say enough about how much his blog and his podcast has taught me about the inner workings of GURPS. Hopefully, you can see my enthusiasm for this framework. I can design just about any spell, and can be assured that, for the most part, the spells will be on par with everything else in GURPS, since they are being built with the exact same advantages used elsewhere. Now, is it cost-effective? Well, from my own personal experiences and from what I've read, it seems that Magic as Skills is slightly cheaper than Magic as Powers, and you'll have less spells in the Magic as Powers framework, which isn't really a bad thing. One pain-in-the-butt side effect of the Magic of Skill system and their prerequisites is that you have to learn a bunch of lower-level spells to work your way up to the good ones, which means over time you'll collect a lot of spells, but only use some of them. At least with the Magic as Powers framework, most, if not all of your spells, will be on point, since you can always spend character points to increase the effectiveness or power of the spell as your character gains experience. Gren's Tangle Growth started out rather weak, but has become more powerful as I've added character points to the advantage. But that should get you started. Magic as Skills is easy to understand. You just have to let your players know that spells aren't automatic, but they can cast any spell they know so long as they have the fatigue or energy points. So that sort of makes up for the unreliability part. It's easy for your players as well. Just lend them the Magic Supplement or the Magic Book in the Dungeon Fantasy RPG or the Basic Set, and they can read what the spells do, and you're done. As I said, I played this way for many years. Now, concerning the remaining Magic frameworks, I've never used them. I talked with my friend Christopher Rice, a prolific GURPS author and longtime GURPS GM, about Ritual Path Magic. And my understanding is that it's a cooperation between the player and the GM. The player announces what they want to accomplish, and the GM decides which paths that might entail, and then costs are calculated. Christopher said that in his opinion, ritual path magic can be the most powerful and the most hackable magic system. But it does take a lot of investment on the part of the GM, as they must adjudicate every spell, and sometimes during gameplay. And it's definitely not something I would recommend to a new GM. And I know nothing about path magic. It was an older system written up in the Thaumatology supplement, with many variations, but it seems to have been overshadowed by ritual path magic, which is newer. If you want to get serious about defining your own magic system, then you may need to pick up the Thaumatology supplement. It has a ton of information. So to summarize, start with the basic set, or the Dungeon Fantasy RPG magic system. Have your characters buy the Magery Advantage and then purchase spells. Voila, you're done. But when you get the itch to dream up your own magic spells, consider one of the Magicus Powers frameworks. And look me up. I'd love to chat with you about it. And as always, thank you for watching.